You know, I did not go into Kickboxer expecting that it was going to be ridiculous enough to end up on the list of Delightfully Devilish films. I really just thought this was going to be an amateur Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, but the guy really continues to impress me.
Ho 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 ho! Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we are looking at one of the most iconic films in the career of the muscles from Brussels. Kickboxer came out in 1989, 1 year after Jean-Claude Van Damme had his major career breakthrough starring in Bloodsport. I have seen Kickboxer 3 times now, and each time I've enjoyed it to a degree, but at the same time, I've always considered it to be one of the lesser Jean-Claude Van Damme films. It's slower and a whole lot less funny than his other films, but since the man is one of my favorite action stars, I figured I'd still give it another look. Kickboxer opens just as any martial arts themed film should, at least in theory. We start with a fight scene featuring Dennis Alexio, a real-life former undisputed kickboxing champion with 68 wins and a 92% knockout rate. Dennis Alexio has a decent spinning back kick, but in the rest of this scene you'd think he was just a random guy they pulled off the street for this film. When I found out this guy was a real-life kickboxing champion, I was very surprised. I was a whole lot less surprised when I found out that now he's serving 15 years in prison for tax fraud.
Now that you've beaten everyone there is to beat, what's next?
Take on the world's best. Show them who's boss.
What about Thailand?
What about it? I understand kickboxing was invented there.
Yes, we all know that facts are so much more interesting when you take your glasses off first.
Kid, book us a flight to Taiwan. First.
Bangkok.
Bangkok, Taiwan, Tokyo. Hey, what's the difference?
I love racism!
The intro credits play out against the backdrop of a lot of exotic locations, which makes me think that a large part of shooting this movie was just to give everyone involved a vacation.
You're fighting your champ next week. I know. I'm ready, don't worry.
Watch your wallet.
She doesn't want my wallet. She wants to make it with the champ.
We're supposed to believe these characters are brothers, but they're both from very obviously different backgrounds. They go to a park to start their training, but for some reason they put almost no effort into it.
You don't win fights with that tip-tap shit.
Well, you're the one training for the fight, dickhead. Put some more effort in. They do a few more kicks and then just completely stop. Is that really the guy's full workout routine? Yeah, I definitely don't believe for a second that he's any kind of kickboxing champion. His opponent is Tong Po, a guy whose strength is conveyed to us by the fact that he repeatedly kicks a support beam, which you can see has obviously not been attached properly. Oh, that was terrifying. I'm always scared of mutes. I have nightmares about Helen Keller. Van Damme's character Kurt goes to unsuccessfully try to talk his brother Eric out of the fight.
So what? Can he move like me? No. We got him.
That statement doesn't end up mattering because when the fight actually begins, Eric is ridiculously slow. That's when he's actually throwing techniques. Most of the time he's just taking hits. He lands a couple of moves, but the crux of this fight scene is him getting pinned against the rope and getting kneed way too many times for it to be entertaining. Kurt tries to throw in the towel, but Tongpo kicks it away and breaks his spine. Emergency services dump him out on the street, so he gets help from a random black guy.
By the way, my name's Taylor. Army Special Forces.
So we are only 20 minutes into the film by this point, and already we have seen the champion completely fall from grace without any reason why we should actually believe that he's the champion. If this entire premise feels familiar right now, it's because you've already seen it in Rocky IV. Apollo Creed gets killed by an international fighter, and Rocky spends the movie training to avenge him. Rocky IV is far from the most believable film of the Rocky series, but let's compare how that film told its story to how Kickboxer tells the same story. The Rocky series had 3 films to build up Apollo Creed as a character to give him some kind of credibility as a boxer, and then in the 4th film we have 30 minutes to hype up his fight with Ivan Drago before having him lose. With Kickboxer, we had 11 minutes to get to know the character. He was dropped into the ring and he fought for a total of 1 minute and 57 seconds. He got knocked down absurdly fast. In Rocky IV, the fight lasted 3.5 minutes and was hyped up way better. Rocky IV was not a film with all that much dramatic power, but Kickboxer tries to tell the same story from the first act of the film in half the running time. Kickboxer starts off ridiculously fast, then does a complete 180 where it slows down to a ridiculously glacial pace for the remaining 80 minutes.
I'm sorry, the doctor says come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yes, we are doing all weekend. It's going to be a long night. You may as well get some sleep.
A large amount of this film is characters from non-English speaking backgrounds attempting to speak English. It is not a remarkably cultured movie.
Your brother is paralyzed.
Again, why would you cast a champion kickboxer in this film if you're not going to make him look good and then you're going to put him in a wheelchair where he's not actually going to be able to kickbox for the rest of the film? It just seems so wasteful.
What do you mean paralyzed?
How many meanings does that word have? He's crippled, jackass.
You're going to make him walk again. You go and you'll make him walk again.
Yeah, okay.
He's going to make him walk again.
Take it easy.
This is Jean-Claude Van Damme actually attempting to act in this film. If you follow his entire career, you can see some great performances from him in Time Cop and JCVD. Early on in the 1980s, he was not up to that standard just yet, and this film really goes to show that. But the African-American character gives him a run for his money in terms of sheer excessiveness.
God damn it, no! I don't want any fucking part of it! Go home!
Wait your 3 months and go home where you're safe. I don't want your blood on my hands. I got enough already.
This is one of those films where you actually have two actors competing to be worse than the other. I really can't remember the last time I saw an African American honestly act this over the top in a non-comedy role, so at least the actor Haskell Anderson can say he achieved something memorable with this film. Jean-Claude Van Damme goes for the sad walking montage that is meant to occur beyond the halfway mark in the film, not 20 minutes in. But this is obviously put in just to pad out the running time. You think the plot starts moving again when flamboyant Fred Williamson tells Eric that he has someone who can train him, but they decide to go out to a club first so that the film can pad out some more running time with pole dances that don't even show any nudity. By the time we actually get there and meet the guy that trains him, we're another 10 minutes into the film. That actually constitutes a third of what we've seen in this film so far. Pacing is definitely not its strong suit.
And I want you to teach me Muay Thai. Really?
Yeah, I'm surprised too. This geriatric does not look like any kind of martial arts master.
But you are American.
He is very obviously not. Should we be trusting your judgment? And this is the point in the film where Kickboxer stops trying to copy Rocky IV and starts trying to shamelessly copy The Karate Kid, which incidentally was created by the same guy who directed the first Rocky movie, John G. Avildsen. And this film is also not the first time Jean-Claude Van Damme has starred in a Karate Kid ripoff. He previously appeared as the villain in No Retreat, No Surrender, which the director of that movie actually cited as being his own version of The Karate Kid. So now he's playing the hero in the exact same story. And funnily enough, in 2016 when they remade Kickboxer, Jean-Claude Van Damme came back as the martial arts master who trained the main character. So he has played 3 different roles in the exact same story. Wow, what should I say, he has versatility? I don't know. And remember that awesome scene in The Karate Kid where the seemingly frail Mr. Miyagi beat up a whole bunch of aggressive young Americans? Well, look at what Mr. Kickboxer can do. Just, what the fuck actually was that? No matter how many times I've watched that scene, I still can't figure out what he's doing. If I was gonna make a list of the weirdest scenes I've ever seen in martial arts movies, I would put that up there. Right next to that scene from Jim Carter where Kurt Thomas has that weird flipping conversation with himself.
Go to village. Get groceries. Groceries?
Catching people in rope make me hungry.
Now, if you've seen The Karate Kid, you're expecting this to be some kind of way that the master is gonna secretly train Jean-Claude Van Damme. It's not. He's literally just sending him to go pick up his groceries. Suddenly, he's happily playing with kids as if he forgot that he came here to avenge his crippled brother. Then he meets his master's niece.
Where are you from?
I was born in Belgium, but now I live in Los Angeles.
Oh, how convenient.
Then he beats up some thugs, making sure that he destroys as much of this shop as he can in the process. The next morning he starts training, not with Mr. Kickboxer, but with his stunt double who comes into the shot every time something slightly challenging is required. I really don't understand the decisions made by the casting department in this film. They cast a kickboxer, and then they made it seem like he can't actually fight, and then they cast an actor who also can't actually fight. Jean-Claude Van Damme is the only one who seems to actually be able to fight in this movie. As the music in this scene starts to feel very Karate Kid-esque, we see a slow series of shots depicting Kurt learning to fight. The techniques he's trained under include having a coconut dropped on his torso and being chased by dogs.
My store was a mess. I worked 4 days cleaning it up.
Yeah, there wasn't too much damage done to your place and the mess wasn't all that bad, so if it took you days to clean up, then you're pretty shit at your job and should be fired. She's just here as part of the obligatory romantic subplot anyway. The training slowly continues, though at least it moves on to some slightly more exotic locations. Van Damme shows off just how flexible he can be by showing how many different spots he can kick while standing on one leg. Then he goes through a stretching scene, which is not comfortable to look at. On top of copying Rocky IV and The Karate Kid, Kickboxer also has no problems shamelessly borrowing scenes from Bloodsport. And that's not surprising, because a lot of the people who worked on Bloodsport then went to work on Kickboxer. Canon Pictures was involved in both films, Paul Herzog did the music in both films, Stan Bush did an iconic 80s sports movie action song for both films. The 2 directors of Kickboxer even served as the producer and the director of photography for Bloodsport respectively, and both films featured performances by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Michael Kissy. But Bloodsport is a far better film in terms of action, pacing and tone, so Kickboxer really just reminds us that we could be watching a better film right now. Then we cut to Jean-Claude Van Damme doing an impersonation of Harold Holt. The instructor doesn't even watch him in this scene, so we might as well just be chilling down there in the water. Then we see Van Damme repeatedly kicking a tree, followed by a relatively nice shot of him showing off a few sequential high kicks. Although Tong Po isn't a particularly tall villain, so I don't imagine this move would actually be all that practical. But then he moves on to doing the spinning reverse jump kick a couple of times. And these are 2 of the most iconic moves in Jean-Claude Van Damme's repertoire. Using the fury over what has happened to his brother, Kurt is able to kick the tree down, and after collapsing onto his bruised and bloody shin in the next shot, he's instantly back up again. This leads to yet another training montage, one which feels exactly like the one from the start of Bloodsport, though at least we get to see Van Damme start showing off some more cool techniques in this one. Then we have this one shot in the hospital with no dialogue to it where Eric sexually harasses the nurse. That not only has no reason to be there, but also it shows a character we're meant to sympathize with acting in a highly inappropriate manner, so it's not good for the characterization at all. This is actually part of a deleted scene which you can see on the VHS cut of the film.
That son of a bitch took my life away, Kurt. You find him and you fuck him up.
Dennis Alexio's performance makes it clear why this scene was cut, but at the same time, it does remind us that there was actually supposed to be a plot in this film.
After lunch, he take you to a special place.
Special place.
You'd think he was talking about some kind of mystic temple of cultural significance. You'd think wrong. It actually turns out to be a karaoke bar where Kurt gets drunk and starts dancing so that he can appeal to Jean-Claude Van Damme's female and queer fanbase. The master goes and encourages a bunch of patrons to start a fight with him, which leads to Kurt beating them all up in a bar fight where Jean-Claude Van Damme has to pretend that he's drunk at the same time. We even have this one guy pick up a table and just scream at him, which leads to him getting kicked into the water in a very long slow motion shot. After the master has tricked him into fighting everyone, next we have him literally taxiing him around on a paddy cab. Mr. Miyagi taught some valuable skills to Daniel LaRusso. This guy just seems content with making Jean-Claude Van Damme his bitch. Kurt gets set up to fight some random kickboxer, and flamboyant Fred Williamson has now returned and started acting like John Hannibal Smith from the A-Team.
I love it when a plan comes together.
The fight turns out to be mostly a game of kick for a kick. There is genuinely no choreography in this scene at all, they just Rochambeau each other, and the fight only lasts a total of 45 seconds. For a film called Kickboxer, this movie seems genuinely very uninterested in actually showing fight scenes. Everyone starts chanting White Warrior, literally blind to the fact that they are actually chanting for Western imperialism.
Keep it the ball!
How many non-English speaking characters in this film were told just to communicate through hand gestures? It seems to be like a recurring theme for some reason. Eric looks at the cover of a newspaper that none of us can read and crumples it up in anger. There's no reason he should understand what's written there. In the film, he earlier pointed out that he didn't know the difference between Thailand and Taiwan. Eric goes to visit Kurt.
You got any breakfast out here in the boonies?
I go make some right now.
Wait, I'll help. I ain't cooked in ages. I'll make my specialty. Jungle Survivor tea.
I really want to believe that line was improvised. I do not want to believe that any successful screenwriter would ever actually put a line like that into a screenplay that got picked up.
I don't want you to fight Tong Po.
I can beat him.
That's what I thought.
I train Muay Thai with the old man.
We still haven't seen this old man fight yet. Why are we supposed to believe that he's a credible mentor?
You're not gonna fight that asshole like that. I'll kick your ass all over the place.
I genuinely cannot tell if that's just dumb writing or if it's meant to be a joke about the fact that, well, he's crippled so he can't kick anything. More training shots, and then shots of Tong Po licking his lips and then smacking up Kurt's girlfriend. He also rapes her off screen apparently, but then in the very next scene she has no signs of bruising whatsoever. If you are going to exploit violence against women as part of your story, you should at least have the decency to commit to it. The criminals who work with Tong Po send some goons to attack Eric, and for a former supposing kickboxing champion, they knock him out with one hit to the head and then throw a knife at a dog in perhaps the least convincing way possible. They take Eric hostage because this is all part of a plan to blackmail Kurt into losing the fight with Tong Po. So apparently, even though the villain of this film is menacing enough to cripple Eric, when it comes to having faith that he's going to win his fight with Jean-Claude Van Damme, nah, the gangsters are like, nah, we need a failsafe. For Kurt and Tong Po's fight, they get their fists wrapped in rope, covered in glue, and then stuck to broken glass. And then we have to watch this ugly motherfucker lick the glass. I don't know what the deal with the makeup department was on this film. They made this guy look so fuck ugly. In real life, Michael Kissy is actually relatively attractive. And this is what he looked like when he starred in Bloodsport a year prior. I'm sure this guy looks back on this film with fondness for the fact that he got a major role in a Hollywood film, but at the same time, he has to look back on himself and say, fuck, I looked like that. Just before the fight, Kurt gets told to let Tong Po destroy him or his brother gets punished. And this is a dumb narrative decision. If we are meant to be inspired by the main character's arc in redeeming himself against the villain of the story, then in the fight, we should see him struggle and come to victory out of his own accord, not because someone told him you have to go down. All this means is that we're not going to get to see Jean-Claude Van Damme really show off his best moves for the majority of the fight. When the fight starts, initially none of the techniques that actually land are any that would require the blood effects of being punched by glass. The bell rings and the first round ends, but Tong Po suddenly stops himself from attacking. For a guy that kicked his opponent's towel out of the ring earlier so that he could literally cripple him, this guy suddenly pretends to give a fuck about the rules. Then we have the master beat up some thugs completely off screen. I really don't understand why this guy was cast. Why didn't they get an actual martial artist? This guy is not a particularly good actor. He doesn't bring anything very iconic to the role. He then crashes a car through the wall of a building, and then we get this one stuntman who really goes over the top. With all the guns pointed at him, one criminal pulls out a knife and then pretends to be threatening, as if there isn't just a bunch of others who are already holding guns to this guy. But in comes an automatic weapon to save everyone, wielded by none other than Fred the Flamboyant.
Sorry it took so long. Traffic was a mess.
Are we meant to take this scene seriously? This whole film has such a ridiculously serious tone, and then this one moment is just ridiculously campy. I just don't get it. Meanwhile, Kurt is getting his ass kicked in the fight as Tongpo starts finally actually using his glass fists for something. And the fight scene starts to actually feel a little better because you can see Kurt trying to resist in spots. And things are convincing enough. After being motivated by the knowledge that his girl was raped and that his brother is safe, as well as the images of a bird spliced in, because apparently there's some obscure bird allegory in the film, Kickboxer then makes another Rocky reference.
Cut these words.
What?
Just cut them.
They tried to make their own version of the "Cut Me Mick" line from the first Rocky film for some obscure reason. And after having his glass fists removed, Tongpo instantly stops remembering how to block attacks. Kurt comes back and Jean-Claude Van Damme begins showing off some more of the iconic martial arts skills that made him famous, as well as the iconic screaming face of his. Things begin to feel exactly like the final fight from Bloodsport as the musical work of Paul Herzog kicks back in and we get a whole lot of slow motion. After knocking Tongpo out of the ring, the guy comes back desperate with a flaming stick but then gets another great kick to the face. After pinning Tongpo up against the wall and pummeling him a few more times, Van Damme delivers one of his most iconic moments. He does that with pretty remarkable fluidity. I'm not gonna lie, after I watched this movie as a kid, I have practiced doing high side kicks many times. I still haven't achieved it, but one day, that's the dream. And Kurt embraces his brother as the film's iconic song plays over the credits.
Never surrender!
As a side note, the characters all seem overtly optimistic of their situation, completely forgetting that they've just pissed off some kind of Thai gangsters. In fact, in Kickboxer 2, they get executed off screen by Tongpo's henchmen. So I guess the overly optimistic ending to this film is all for nothing, but the sequel was so lame that it's easier just to pretend that it's not canon. Is Kickboxer a good film? Not really, but it's definitely not devoid of entertainment. I've long been a sucker for Jean-Claude Van Damme films, and even in comparison to his worst films, I really don't consider this one to be all that bad. Among the more positive aspects of this film are that Jean-Claude Van Damme actually does show off a lot of cool moves throughout the movie, as well as the fact that the locations give the film a nice exotic feeling. And even though the premise is plagiarized from Rocky IV and the Karate Kid with elements of Bloodsport, it does feel objectively far different to the more conventional Van Damme films. It's still a very amateur film, but with its 80s vibe and some of Jean-Claude Van Damme's moves, it still succeeds as a bit of a guilty pleasure. But objectively, Kickboxer is still riddled with issues. The derivative story starts out too fast and then starts going too slow for the rest of the film, meaning that it's a film that's simultaneously too fast and too slow to actually build any good drama. And even though the film thinks that it has a spiritual story, there is still no character development, no exploration of themes of honor or forgiveness. There's nothing. It's a very shallow movie. For a film that wants to copy so much of the Karate Kid, there's none of the character development or relatability that made that movie a classic. And even the main bad guy in this film isn't the real villain. It's the gangster in charge of him, who we never see face any actual consequences. Frankly, there is a reason you've never heard of Mark DeSalle or David Worth, who for the record were the two directors on this film. They were far more in their element when they were helping someone else to make Bloodsport. The biggest sin of Kickboxer is simply that it has way too many boring moments. There are some cool scenes showing off Van Damme's prowess, particularly the final fight scene, but the majority of the film is composed of boring conversations had by characters who aren't developed at all, or extended shots of Van Damme training which try to distract audiences from the fact that there really isn't any actual story to begin with. Since the film is so generic and derivative, it actually would have been a lot better if you cut 20 minutes of the narrative out. If that happened, it could have moved a lot faster.
But that's not the way it happened.
But unfortunately, the dull moments in this film are very high in amount, but far too long and too slow to hold any major entertainment value with the audience. And there isn't even really anything to laugh about along the way. Kickboxer gets 4 high kicks out of 10. It's a relatively nice looking Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, which shows off a lot of his great fighting skills and gives us a pretty cool final fight. But it requires way too much patience from its audience because it's too fast and too slow, as well as too ridiculous and too serious. But it's never too entertaining, and that's the main problem. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devillish, you guys. If you would like to see any more episodes of this show, please hit that subscribe button. If there are any movies you want to see me discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, until next time, I have been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace. Never surrender!